Good morning from Singapore, and welcome to the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore webinar on the impact on Russia-Ukraine conflict on energy transition. I'm Alessandro Arduino, and I'm Principal Research Fellow here at MEI. And today, I'm very glad to have with us Philip Rose. Mr. Rose has an extensive experience in energy and public-private partnership in Asia. Philip has almost 20 years of knowledge in how to deal with the Middle East, Asia, Africa in conventional oil and gas renewable. His current focus within a large multinational is helping government, industry, and society navigate energy transition through integrated urban solution in China and Europe. Early in his career, Mr. Rose spent several years seconded to joint venture in Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And also he had spent some time in Brunei, Nigeria, Netherlands, and United Kingdom working on energy. His area of interest are quite related to the volatile environment where private investors face ambiguity and the need to understand deeply the political, macroeconomic, and local dynamic. Today, Mr. Rose is going to speak in private capacity, and all his views are on his own. And I strongly invite our audience during his presentation to start sending questions using our Zoom chat box, and I will be very glad to read it to Mr. Rose. But now, without further ado, Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alessandro, and thanks a lot for inviting me to the prestigious Middle East Institute to share a few thoughts on what is an incredibly complex, multifaceted topic with both kind of short-term dislocations and longer-term implications, and a lot of challenge to distinguish one from the other. I think before diving in, I'd like to add a couple of points about my own background. So as you said, I've been in the private sector for almost 18 years, with a good 10 years of those spent in joint ventures, which were really about local commercial partnerships to help national governments, in this case, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and others, kind of develop their energy resources. And so that has given me a chance to really kind of figure out, like, what are some of the benefits, but also challenges of the private sector in helping countries with their own development, their own priorities. And one of the most proud moments of my career was in Iraq, which was a project about helping the country develop its gas industry for power generation and for eventually in the future creating their own petrochemical industry, which is a really, really tough operating environment. And that celebrated a milestone yesterday with the country's first export of semi-refrigerated LPG, which sounds like a very technical thing, but it's more than a decade or more of really blood, sweat, and tears of all kinds of expertise to actually achieve something like that. And I moved into the renewable space in 2018. So the reason I say this is because the perspective that I will be sharing is one where is my own. So it's necessarily narrow, but it's one where the private sector features prominently as part of the solution. So as I was preparing for this discussion today, I started having a bit of a kind of epistemological reflection and realized that three core beliefs that I had have been really, really challenged. And so this made me really think deeply about what do I believe in? And when I choose to believe in one thing, what are some of the things that I choose not to see or choose to ignore? And for me, the three main ones, and I might invite you to think about your own beliefs as well in the context of this Russia-Ukraine crisis. So the first one was a belief that developed around 2018 that oil and gas is a sunset industry. And what we're seeing is that whereas it's really hard to figure out whether there's any geopolitical implications of like solar or wind or things like that. There definitely is, and we see that today, the geopolitics of the energy transition. And especially when the world focused on removing an old energy system before having built a new one, this does causes some major hiccups. The second thing is, I mean, I grew up in the, well, became an adult in the 1990s and 2000, when really big power politics seemed to be a thing of the past. We were talking about global institutions, rules-based order. But actually what we see is that these things like national security, national priorities, they do matter, and they can take precedence over a rules-based order. And then the last one, which is a belief that is maybe only 10 years old. It's a belief that we're living in an era of perpetual cheap money and a lot of debt, and that the system cannot take a change to interest rates because it would bankrupt large parts of the economy. And I think that belief may be challenged today, as we are seeing with the reaction of the Fed against inflation. And so I think this is asking fundamental questions about what business models are viable or no longer viable in this context. So more than ever, I ask myself, what do I believe in? And therefore, what am I choosing to ignore? So this presentation is going to be about finding a few, hopefully useful lenses or frameworks that can orient us in this flurry of news and events. So, okay, the first point I think is to realize that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a game changer for European energy. And I think there are three angles to that. I mean, one is we all know that Europe was relying on Russia for about 40% of its gas, but that blurs the real message, which is that some parts of Europe, especially in the south and in the east of Europe, relied 100% on Russian gas. And so what we're seeing is, in the short term, is like let's call it a 1 or 2 year big scramble, where Europe is trying to improve its energy security and its energy independence, looking at crude oil, probably the easiest, oil products like diesel and refined products, a lot less easy, and then gas, which is almost impossible. And there, really, all options are on the table. So we are seeing a scramble throughout the whole size of the solution space, meaning new focus on coal, LNG imports from the Middle East and from the US, but that the ability to do so is heavily constrained, and we'll dive into that a bit more. Longer term, we will have, and I'm talking about 5-year time horizon, the decoupling of the European energy system from Russia will largely be achieved through both sides of the energy equation, so the supply side and the demand side. And it's important to keep both in mind because both have huge implications. So on the supply side, it means an energy system that is reliant on LNG, renewable generation, much more storage, both gas storage and hopefully battery storage as well. But also on the demand side, so it'll be a much more dynamic and modern energy and electricity system. It's important to make the distinction, where efficiency will be the rule of the game, a lot better regulation, much more dynamic, and a focus on moving away from hydrocarbon for sectors that have been traditionally hard to transition, especially like the building stock and heating. And then the last theme here is to realize that what we're talking about is an extraordinarily painful transition. because this context of energy challenge is coming on top of an already problematic inflation picture, which means that large parts of core European industry are no longer competitive because their costs have gone up. And those industries go away and never come back. So this also means that the Eurozone as a bloc, so the euro as a currency, as it is designed today, is at risk. Why? Is because the inflation moves at different speeds in different parts of the Eurozone. And because the euro is shared everywhere, countries don't have national level discretion to make any monetary policy adjustments. So this is causing strains in the system, which require reallocation and especially remedies to address the unequal distribution of pain. In practice, it means middle class, low middle class bear the brunt of inflation and of higher energy prices and have no way out. And I think we can safely say that the French election results of yesterday are a clear indication that economy is now top of mind, and the current government doesn't have compelling answers. So the second lens, if you like, that is useful to keep in mind is that Russia's not going anywhere. It is and will remain a significant energy player, and some of the numbers are worth keeping in mind. I mean, we're talking about 14% of world crude oil production, and a staggering amount of that exported to Europe. And then, of course, Russia being one of the world's largest natural gas production, which is a crucial source of energy, especially to help manage the energy transition. A lot of that exported by pipeline and a share by LNG. So for Russia, it's really a space to watch. But as of kind of today, what we're seeing are primarily short-term logistical challenges of physical nature, physical constraints. So how to reroute oil and gas in the absence of enough pipelines and enough LNG capacity to find new markets. I think the biggest one to keep in mind is what's going to happen with the EU latest sanction package to do with sanctions on insurance, trade finance, and shipping, which, if implemented, could actually wipe out quite a large chunk of Russian oil production in terms of its ability to find a buyer. That sanctions package is being revisited and may be changed to a kind of a tariff discount equivalent to what China and India are currently paying, which would have the same effect of hurting Russia, but guarantee enough oil in the system to avoid basically a global crisis of oil, which, if you ask me what would be the top geopolitical risk today, I would name that one as number one. And then lastly, in terms of short-term logistical challenges, it's interesting to see that current buyers of Russian crude still consider Russian energy as incremental barrels, as in like core sources of energy from other countries, which are seen as more stable, and Russian imports as being kind of ad hoc due to the uncertainty not only about logistics, but about Russia's ability to continue production at current levels in the face of all the sanctions that affect technology, spare parts, and manpower. And Russia's kind of position has been to find, to rely on its primarily Asian trade relationships. So a lot of the spare energy is being purchased by China, by Europe and by wider Asia. And interestingly, there's some reports that say that India is actually re-exporting some of that energy back to Europe, which is an interesting one to watch, whether that will be tacitly agreed to or not. So primarily, we've seen a dislocation of flow, but not a dislocation of supply for now. And another lens that is worth keeping in mind is that we were already talking about inflation before the Russia-Ukraine crisis, due to the erosion of supply chains in the COVID period, pickup of economy, and other factors which are a bit beyond this presentation. But now the Russia-Ukraine crisis is not just impacting energy, but Russia and the Ukraine are large exporters of a lot of other things. So, for example, coal is one, but also metals and minerals. So iron, palladium, fertilizers has been a lot in the news, platinum and aluminum, and other food products like especially wheat, barley, and others. So what this is doing is it's exacerbating food price increases, and it's making the input of regional industries that depend on it more costly. So it's killing industry competitiveness in entire parts of countries. Like, for example, Alessandro, close to you, the pasta business in Italy is punished by the situation, and very difficult to see how and when they'll be able to recover. And of course, this is having a compound effect on demand. So now I'd like to this one is a little technical, but I think it's worth talking about. So it's like when we talk about Europe wanting to pull the plug on Russia, especially on gas, basically it's not possible. It's extraordinarily complex to do that, and it requires literally all of the above type of answer. And so what I'm putting up on screen here is the International Energy Agency's 10-point blueprint, if you like, for Europe to reduce or eliminate its reliance on Russian energy. And I'll pick out a few highlights there. And on the left is the corresponding 1-year chart about how much EU gas imports can be reduced by implementing some of these measures within a year. And I think the key messages here is, one is gas is extraordinarily complex to replace. So even if we look at alternative sources of supply, so basically buying LNG or buying more piped gas from other countries, we only talk about like 10-20% of overall supply that can be swapped in that way. But then another realization is Europe needs to increase the amount of gas that it stores seasonally to deal with winters when demand is much higher. So a lot of that alternative supply is actually being used to fill up huge gas storage facilities, which are basically empty reservoirs that are being used to offset the huge swing in demand when we go into the winter period. That one is the seasonality is important to keep in mind. And then there's a lot of things that can be done to mitigate gas needs, which are actually not on the supply side, but on the demand side. So basically, we're telling people to use less energy as a solution. So kind of back to the prehistoric times in a summary. But what it means is things like that are really expensive and hard to do, like installing heat pumps in buildings and in cities to replace the need for gas-fired heating, looking at all kinds of upgrades to improve energy efficiency, and even doing things like policy-based stuff where you essentially you compel or you nudge people to use less heating in Europe or cooling elsewhere. And then that only takes you down to about a third of your gas needs. So you have still a long way to go. So some of the other points in the IEA plan are like, of course, new wind and solar capacity, coal and nuclear are massively back on the agenda, taxation for windfalls for companies that are making more money in this period, things like thermostat reduction, and then finding ways of replacing. At the moment, gas in Europe is used heavily as a flexible supply. So when you have not enough solar or wind, you kick off, you switch on gas plants for this flexibility. So finding other solutions for that and investing in those. For example, hydro can be used as a storage mechanism, gas storage, battery storage, all of that is on the cards. And then besides that, you have political solutions, which are really challenging to do. Like, for example, partnering with Turkey, with countries in the Caspian Sea, even with Libya, all of which can provide alternatives to Russian energy, but require navigating very, very complex regional and security issues. So what does it mean for the energy transition? So I think that the first thing it means is that we're not hearing as much. I don't want to make a bad joke, but we're not hearing as much from Greta Thunberg today as we used to. But what I mean by that is top of agenda, both in governments, but also in the street with the public, is really about energy security and energy affordability, actually over climate concerns. So this is leading, for example, Germany to look at reinvesting in coal, which is just, if you told me that a year ago, I wouldn't have believed you. There is, of course, now a much more concerted policy-making effort across the board to sustain focus on investment, not just for climate now, but for energy independence as well. However, a lot of that focus is very national or nationalistic even, or following a industrial policy approach, even in things like subsidies for hydrogen are very much defined to target local or European or regional companies and research centers, and basically against China. Let's be transparent. There's a desire by governments to promote their local industries to make a transition, not just in the energy space, but in the industrial space, to avoid what's happened in wind and solar, which has been dominated by Asian players or Chinese players. Now, having said that, the higher energy, commodity, supply chain issues, all of that is, of course, also impacting low carbon alternatives. So the chart I have on the left, this green line. So over the last, what is it, like 10, 15 years, the levelized cost of energy for solar has been constantly dropping to a point where new solar systems were cheaper than running existing conventional energy systems like gas or coal in almost all countries. But now, the last year or so, what we're seeing is, so this is a chart about polysilicon prices, boom, are going through the roof back to levels of a decade ago. So that is, of course, hampering further development in the renewable space. It's still more competitive than conventional, but it means that funding and also the low returns of the renewable space are having it's basically deferring adoption of an investment in projects. Another massive challenge for the energy transition is the regulatory challenge, which is how to protect consumers due to the fact that market deregulation, which is necessary to move into energy transition, is hurting the pocket of families and everyone. And what we're seeing though is maybe unlike earlier, a much more holistic approach to policy making, focusing on energy efficiency as well. So retrofitting, heating, and thinking about the whole energy system as opposed to just the generation part. And even a rethinking about what does industry actually mean? How do you do low carbon or zero carbon sustainable industrial hubs in your country? So how do you co-locate energy generation, maybe hydrogen, carbon storage, together with various sectors of the industry to create an integrated hub? So, and we're seeing much more creativity now to include aspects around inequality, cost of living, even health and transport, to design new policy frameworks for this new world. But coal is having a new lease of life, and even coal prices are going back up. So now, if we try to translate all this stuff into what does it mean for Asia, I think one important perspective here is really to stop and think about China. I think it's fair to say that the magnitude of the US-led and Europe-led sanctions against Russia are I would say, a historical first. It's the first time that, or in recent memory or recent history, that foreign reserves of a country held in abroad basically were frozen out. And so, of course, China is thinking, given its massive foreign reserves abroad, how to reduce their exposure in the scenario where someone were to do the same to them. And that has really wide-ranging implications on the structure of the Chinese economy and its exposure to foreign markets. And that is causing a lot of deep reflection there. Another effect, of course, is that Europe was expecting more alignment from China about an aligned front regarding Russia's actions in the Ukraine and the importance of this idea of sovereignty. And so there is some backlash among European government leaders encouraging industry to reconsider their exposure to China overall. But how long-term that is, whether it's transitory, remains to be seen, given continued importance of the Chinese market for the economy. The third point is that the ongoing China dynamic zero COVID policy that it is surprising foreign investors and MNCs, given its impact on the ability to continue cross-fertilization, exchanges of knowledge, and just the fluidity that is required for continuing normal business operations. And then there's a question mark on the impact of all that on Chinese domestic growth, and on to what level we will see a localization of supply chains, basically reviewing the global manufacturing model that China has enjoyed for the last 10, 20 years. The second point I'd say here is this new topic of stagflation, which as I said when I started this presentation, is there's never been as much debt in the global system ever in history. And a lot of that debt was fueled by very low, close to zero interest rates. And so now you have large parts of the economy that are so leveraged, I'm talking private companies, that you can call them zombified, which means that their cash flow is barely able to fund the cost of debt at low interest rate levels. And so that gives very little room for any change in monetary policy, because it would just wipe out so much of the economy. And so we're in a situation now where we have likely negative US GDP, very little space for monetary policy to tame inflation without causing damage. And as a consequence, a lot of question marks about what is the macro environment going forward, which we haven't had for a good decade. And so all of this, I think I was trying to figure out what does it mean, or what are some relevant themes for Singapore. So I think one of which is we're seeing that already, is these high energy prices are having an impact on manufacturing competitiveness, the export market, even the labor market. But, and maybe we could say that the increase in geopolitical risk usually historically comes with a reduction in global trade. So there's this inverse relation. But there are silver linings, or there are areas of growth. I mean, one of the few sectors that is less or not hurt in the latest downturn, or has even gained is commodities. So metals, mining, and all of that. So we can talk about, where we talked about the tech decades, the previous decade, we're probably talking about a commodities decade now, and Singapore is a very important hub in Asia for that, or globally for that. And of course, there's a huge effort to reconfigure supply chains regionally to account for the current shortfalls and the current geopolitical reality. So there's a question mark as well, which is on the back of the crypto crisis that we've had over the last week or so, is this shakeup opening up opportunities for Singapore to continue its kind of hub, the growth of the hub of excellence in all things blockchain, especially I'm thinking applications for carbon markets and decentralized autonomous organizations, etc. So I'll wrap up with a quick summary of my views on Saudi Arabia, because of the MEI's focus on the Middle East. So to me, the core interests of the kingdom are around maintaining its role in OPEC plus and its agreement with Russia. And so Russia, there's been no push or discussion about excluding Russia from OPEC plus, which is important to note. And to balance that with US requests to increase oil production. And the reason the US is doing that is because of the upcoming elections in the US, and the fact that inflation and the pump price is such an emotional thing over there. And Saudi has views of the market which are quite different to the US administration. So the kingdom's view is that actually the fundamentals of supply demand is not responsible for the huge prices that we're seeing now, and that the prices are affected by other things like geopolitical risk, or the risk of other sanctions disrupting the market. And so they don't believe that increasing oil production would actually help the US, or that it would require such a level of oil production increase as to warrant a huge US concession to do with Iran, for example, that the US would never give. We're still likely to see some form of announcement during or following the Biden's visit to the kingdom, but whether it'll actually materialize or be substantial remains to be seen. On the political side, I think the consensus among analysts, and this is a bit outside my expertise area, is that the Crown Prince has really consolidated his authority. So and also has strong support from the young population, which is a large part of the overall population in the kingdom. And so we're probably seeing a period of relative stability in the next 5 years. Although worth noting a couple of kind of headwinds, one on the pace of reform implementation, so Saudi 2030, is challenging because of the paucity of human capital, the small size of the private sector, and the overall administration and the Saudi system it has a lot of inertia behind that. And there's a lot of costs associated with continued support to core allies like Jordan and Egypt, which are struggling due to food insecurity. And so the Saudis are helping them. And we've also seen a refocus in Saudi towards, let's call it, domestic nationalism. So leaving away the pan-Arabism and the pan-Islamism that was driving assertive foreign policy recently. So as an outlook, I think for Saudi, clearly what we're seeing is a much stronger orientation towards Asia for longer term energy markets and bold investments in the downstream hydrocarbon sector, including in China and India, actually, because Saudis and the kingdom, they realize that Saudi crude especially will remain in the system forever because of its low cost of production, the stability of its production, and the fact that the grade of crude is also one that is clean and therefore attractive globally. So that gives them quite a lot of leverage. Maybe a last remark before pausing there would say, like, there's actually not that much kind of buffer that OPEC Plus has to increase production, even if the US wanted to, because they're already about 2.5 million barrels per day behind their cumulative group target. And only the kingdom and the UAE have spare capacity to do much about that. And other producers outside OPEC, like Libya, are really struggling to move beyond. They're producing about 10% of their capacity. So there's 1 million barrels that are out of the system. And there's still looming uncertainty, especially about this EU sanctions ban that could really crunch the market. So let me pause there.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's been a very interesting and very deep researched presentation, and you touched a lot of topics that stem out from this ongoing crisis from Ukraine, not only related to energy. I mean, you mentioned painful transition, zombified company, inflation, and I'm quite worried if I'm asking the question about stagflation, what their answer will be. But having said that, I find very interesting when you started your presentation, you mentioned a belief, and now closing the presentation, you were talking about emotion in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So as you give a very scientific and data-driven presentation, I'm sure the Russian invasion of Ukraine created and is creating a very deep emotional involvement. So how you remain critical when there is so much emotional involvement attached to a topic?
Yeah, and I think you're asking almost a philosophical question, I think, here, and not just related to this particular topic, but in general. And I think, because I've been thinking about the meaning of this crisis as well for Singapore. I was actually traveling in Europe when there was this news headline from Singapore that reached me, which was about chicken. How one person found a chicken in a bag in a fair price for 72, I think it was 72 Sing dollars. And that made pretty much everyone knows about that chicken. It happened to be 2 chickens, and it happened to be, I think, a premium chicken, if I believe. But what I mean is that's emotion. Like when a hawker food vendor cannot buy chicken, and therefore has a livelihood that is at risk, I mean, that becomes kind of the most important issue for that person, and definitely the issue that this person will talk about to their member of parliament, and puts away a lot of the debate about climate change and moral principles around how to deal with Russia, for example. And it's important to know that the kind of negative feelings towards Russian actions are not shared everywhere. Even in Europe, there are parts of Europe that believe that the US was behind this. And I don't want to talk about why is that and the role of propaganda, but even in Asia, the emotional view about Russian actions are quite different, I would say, than what you would find in the street in Western Europe. And so for me, what has helped me is to pause and take time to give space to what are my beliefs. What is it that I'm accepting without the need for evidence? Because the moment I do that, this opens my mind to other opinions, and other opinions usually mean other realities, like the reality of the hawker food vendor who can't buy chicken. So I guess that's kind of my compass in a world where, even with 18 years of experience in the energy sector, I feel it's still a struggle to find the right frameworks to guide my actions, my views, and some of my professional choices. Does that help?
Absolutely. I mean, and we start to receive a lot of questions from audience already. And one, of course, as we are based here in Singapore, is directly related to something that you already touched base in your presentation, and is counting on your 20 years of experience, what this spike on energy price will mean for Singapore. Yeah. And you talked about the geopolitical risk, but increase of trade, and I think it will be very interesting to deal more into that. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe worth recognizing that what we're talking about today is I don't think we're overstating things if we say we're talking about a generational crisis or a set of crises. One to do with energy, with Russian energy being just a part of it. The other part being having dismantled our conventional energy system without having a new one in place. And also not having had a good discussion about how we're going to continue hydrocarbon investment while we transition. Like if we are pushing multinationals and large oil and gas players to divest, who's going to do that in the transition period? So energy is one. The second is this macroeconomic issue of inflation with a ton of debt. The third one is the geopolitical challenge to do with US, China, and all of that. And then the last one, which we were kind of forgetting, is the climate crisis, for God's sake, as well. So for generational crisis, which are uniquely complex because they have a real deep domestic impact, with the pain felt locally very profoundly. And so the challenge, I think, for Singapore is how to balance inclusive policies while maintaining regional competitiveness, because Singapore's model draws its prosperity from its openness. So to me, Singapore has long been an incubator for innovation. And there's a lot of areas there that Singapore is very advanced in terms of low carbon energy products, clean tech in general, a lot even at the R&D stage. Even the crypto and the DAO and the blockchain space. And of course, the role of Singapore as a regional hub, especially given the neighborhood, remains attractive. But I think the challenge is about how to innovate, not just in commercial models and technology, but really on the policy side, on the demand side, on energy efficiency, and doing so with social policies that favor equality, which is a really hard nut to crack. But I think in the highly talented Singaporean workforce and the configuration of Singapore primarily as a city gives a certain number of advantages there as well.
And I have another question from our audience, and is related to Russia and China relationship. It was very clear at the end of the Winter Olympic where China was standing, and has been reiterated during these days. But from the energy point of view, the question is Russia going to increase its supply of oil and gas to China, and how?
So Russia is trying to find I think there's a short-term and a longer-term thing here. In the short term, it's a scramble. So Russia is trying to find alternative buyers for its energy, and there is an element of opportunism from the part of India and China, because there's suddenly a shortfall for Russia in terms of its buyers on the western side of the country. So this is an opportunity for countries like China and India to basically procure hydrocarbons and command steep discounts. And for now, there's not been major backlash from sanctions makers, US and Europe, to kind of interfere with that. So longer term, we may see a reconfiguration of trade routes really towards China and India. And the big question mark, I'd say, is twofold, I would say. One is, how sustainable is Russian oil and gas production in the face of ongoing sanctions, as in lack of spare parts? Like there's a story recently of, I believe it was Gazprom that required specialist maintenance for its gas turbines, which could only be done in Canada, and Canada froze the turbines and refused to return them, and Gazprom used that argument to shut gas pipelines to Europe. But it's an anecdote, but the real point is that Russia has not functioned autonomously from an oil and gas perspective over the last 20 years or so. And so there may be quite a significant impact on its ability to maintain production levels. And that could have quite a significant impact if that shortfall in production is not met by additional investments elsewhere. Now, what is the impact of that on the Russian Federation and its budget, which I think is a core question. Well, at the moment, I mean, with oil prices of $120 and above, even if you sell half what you used to be selling before, it's still hundreds of billions of dollars a year that are funding the Russian Federation, which at least from a kind of state budget perspective is more than enough. The real question is what's going to happen to the rest of the economy, given it is cut off as well from the rest of the world, and what added cost that will bring to the Russian Federation to basically prop up a non-hydrocarbon sector that is going to be down on its knees. So hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. And I have a very long question now from a colleague of mine, Asif Suja, and he's asking, Persian Gulf countries have been striving to move away from their dependence on oil to diversify their economy. Russia and Ukraine war has compelled Europe to move away from their dependence on hydrocarbon to punish Russia. Does this commonality provide an avenue of cooperation between the Gulf and European countries?
Yeah, so there definitely are a lot of exchanges between European and Gulf countries on, I would say, the alternative or non-oil and gas space. So a lot of investments in the renewable space in the Gulf, and also really interesting advanced discussions about looking at ammonia and hydrogen exports produced green, so using renewable energy, and then shipped into Europe. How competitive that'll be remains to be seen, but that is showing an extent of cooperation that goes way beyond the traditional hydrocarbon space there. There is, I would say, there's a major advantage in the Gulf to move into renewables for itself, actually, because let's not forget that most of the energy system in the Gulf is based on oil and gas for power generation. And so there's an demographic and an economic growth rate, which is pretty significant, which is eating into the amount of hydrocarbon that is available for export. And at a staggering opportunity cost. And so the main beneficiaries of the energy transition in the Gulf is the Gulf itself, to continue its role as kind of the last bastion, or the last kind of producer of the producer of the last barrels that the world will need in 2050 or so.
Oh, and you mentioned the renewable, but also I think it was just a news yesterday or a couple of days ago when looking at Italy, for example, Eni just last month doubled its import of gas from Algeria, but just yesterday confirmed a 27 years agreement with Qatar for the development of the northeastern field. At the same time, Gazprom cut more than 50% his output to Italy. Look good, as you mentioned, if we have to divide in short-term and long-term, for the long-term part. But I'm sure, as in everything, and especially in energy, time is the essence. Europe is getting ready to transition out of dependence from Russia, but this is going to take an important time. So in your opinion, this how is going to play in the acceleration, of course, of this project? And at the end, as you made the joke before on that, but I think it's very compelling, how now avoiding this global energy crisis is making, let's say, us less passionate about climate change.
Yeah, so to me, what I think this is, I mean, okay, this again, it's multifaceted points here. I think the private sector has really bought into the Paris commitments and commitments to decarbonize. So there's a huge enthusiasm among private sector players to move into sustainability and find all options possible to do that, which I think is new and is encouraging. Although in markets that are not fully deregulated, and in many cases in Asia, actually, the cost for executing some of these plans is prohibitive, especially in a period of economic stagnation or low growth, or higher interest rates as well. Now, for Europe, I think I really hope I'm wrong, but there's massive pressures on the cohesion of Europe in its approach towards Russia, because of the fact that both the economic prosperity east and west in Europe is so different, and also the exposure to Russia is also very different. So unless Europe is able to quickly agree ways of supporting the countries with the most pain, I think we will see more and more emphasis on inequality and I would say populist type kind of priorities over the immediacy of the climate emergency that we've had in the headlines. So in practice, it means the energy transition is going ahead, but probably on an even slower timeline, I would say.
Oh, thank you. Unfortunately, I think we are running out of time, so we have time for one more question from the audience. And I want just to ask you, if you have the chance to talk with President Biden right now, and you have the possibility to give him one suggestion ahead of his meeting with Mohammed bin Salman in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and especially in terms of expectation, what do you expect in terms of OPEC plus increase of production and efficiency for that? What it will be your suggestion?
Yeah. To me, the challenge is I think that the room to maneuver of US President Biden is going to be very limited, and I think part of the goal of the meeting is going to be really about testing what kind of a potential partner Mohammed bin Salman can be, not just in the context of energy, but in the context of regional plans, especially the perspective of normalizing ties with Israel. So I think the message I would have is to balance pragmatism with principle as well, especially given his campaign promises relating to the assassination of Khashoggi. So that would be my message to him. But I think, to me, the broader kind of thing on my mind that I wanted to share is more of a kind of a broad rule for life that I think is relevant to all of us, which is the first one is really to encourage all of us to always keep learning, and especially to really understand the energy system, because that navigating the energy system is going to be our daily reality in the next 5 to 10 years. Concepts like final energy use, the difference between energy and electricity, and familiarize ourselves with the messy bits, like what does demand side policy and its challenges, what are they? So this is the first one, keep learning. And then the second one is about Singapore, actually, which I really think there's a massive scope for the country to continue with innovation. But I think it means that everyone needs to be more and more comfortable with uncertainty as a norm, and therefore to find an inclusive approach that doesn't leave anyone behind while staying open to the world, I would say.
And with that, Philip, I would like to sincerely thank you for your time with us today in our webinar. It's been extremely interesting, and you have been us a really broader view on the impact of the conflict, not only on the energy system, but in all other areas. Please also allow me to thank to all our audience for being with us from the beginning to the end, and to Sharon and Jamalia for having supported in the background today's event. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you, everyone.